It's my favorite time of the year, and not because of the holidays, it's because everybody's making their favorite movies of the year list. Top 10 best movies of 2024. I love it, but don't take it too seriously. The whole point of this should be to highlight some movies that other people might have missed. It should be a celebration of cinema. Whenever I see a top 10 list that has none of the movies that I would have put there, that's great news because there's probably some movies that I have either missed completely or didn't see the value in that way, so they offer me a new perspective. It's really a good thing. So don't take this personally. You can't really rank art. Most of these movies have nothing to do with each other and don't make sense to put up against one another. But I'm going to do it anyway because A, it's the internet, and B, it's fun. So here are my top 20 movies of 2024 of the entire year. I've seen 185 new releases from last year. I've still got a few big ones to go though. I'll be honest, you're not going to see The Brutalist. You're not going to see Exhibiting Forgiveness. Queer, Luca Guadagnino's other incredible movie from this year. So I missed some big ones, even though I saw so many. But at number 20, a movie I've talked about before on my underrated list and on my best horror lists, it's Your Monster, directed by Carolyn Lindy with the incomparable Melissa Barrera. It also stars Tommy Dewey as the monster. And I just think that this movie is so unique. It's sexy, it's funny, it's even a little gory at times, dare I say scary. It's a horror romantic comedy. How many of those do we get? I can't think of a whole lot. I'm sure there's a few, but it's a rare genre mashup. I think we can all agree on that. And so this movie should be celebrated, and not a lot of people saw it. It's such a brisk watch. It's so easy and fun. I really implore you to seek it out. It's on digital right now, so you can only rent it, but I'm sure it'll be streaming somewhere pretty soon. It's also got some songs in it. It's a lightweight musical, and it celebrates theater. So in a year that we also got Ghostlight and Sing Sing, it's so apropos. You got to watch it. Speaking of Sing Sing, my number 19 is Sing Sing, and you're going to see this movie come up on a lot of people's best of the year lists, often at number 1. I probably would have liked this movie a lot more had I seen it in a theater instead of a screener, which is how I watched it. Trying to watch this movie, and you'll probably relate to this, felt like Captain Ahab searching for Moby Dick. I had the opportunity to watch it in March at South by Southwest. I was at that music and film festival. I decided to go see the Roadhouse remake, stop laughing, instead, which, in hindsight is a decision that I regret, but it is what it is. Sing Sing eventually had a very limited theatrical release in July. I missed it then. It did show near me, but I had a family issue or something like that. And then it never got released on digital rental or the Blu-ray. You can't, to this day, you cannot buy or rent this movie, which 6 months later is really wild. In today's climate, you can often rent a movie 2 to 4 weeks after it's shown in theaters, but definitely a couple of months later, it should be available. They're actually going to re-release Sing Sing in theaters in January 2025, probably because it's guaranteed to be nominated for some Oscars, and that's great marketing. So I don't feel like A24 did a great job in the distribution of this film, but it is what it is. It is just as good as everybody says it is. It's about a group of inmates at Sing Sing prison that they form a sort of drama club. And so they enact plays with one another in order to process their emotions and deal with all the things that you can imagine are going on in prison. The unique thing about this movie is that it stars the inmates who were actually in Sing Sing in this drama club playing themselves alongside Coleman Domingo, who's given a ridiculously good performance as always. So I do think I would have liked it a lot more had I seen it in a theater, but I sought this movie out all year and it was worth it. So I suggest that you do the same. My number 18 is another movie that I've already talked about recently. It's called Uprising, and it was co-written by Park Chan-wook, my favorite director, and it's about when Japan invaded Korea during the Joseon dynasty. This is a fantastic historical epic. I have no idea how accurate it is. Probably not very accurate at all, if Hollywood is any indication, but I don't care. That's not why we watch movies like this. It's got incredible fight choreography and a really cool core story about two people on opposite sides of this war that are best friends, even though one's a slave and one's a rich man. And then they come back together later. Maybe. I don't want to spoil the movie for you. The interesting thing to me is that this is on Netflix. It's been on Netflix all year, and shitty movies do really well on Netflix. And it feels like, maybe it's just anecdotal and I'm wrong, nobody actually watched this movie. So check it out. Number 17 is the action extravaganza Monkey Man, starring Dev Patel, directed by Dev Patel, written by Dev Patel. This is really his vision. He tried so hard to get this made. I saw this at South by Southwest, and I got to see him speak on it. Jordan Peele was there as well. The movie is great by itself in isolation if you like action cinema, but I think how it was made and how hard he tried to get it made is part of why I love it so much. Everything went wrong. People kept getting hurt. Dev Patel broke his hand. He had to use his own iPhone to get a scene finished at one point. And the movie was kind of dead in the water. They were going to stop production on it because of budgetary issues and all the issues that were going on. And then Jordan Peele swept in and got it finished and got it distributed, which I think is fantastic. Obviously, there's a lot of fighting in the movie, but they break chairs and tables. And he talked about gluing sets back together because they had to use a broken chair for another shot, even though they'd already hit somebody with it. And just kind of really awesome indie filmmaking. And I think to watch it is to celebrate that. And it's fantastic even without knowing that, like I said. And also Dev Patel has never given a leading role like this. And so he just kind of had to write it for himself. He knows how to fight. He's just never been given the chance to take a role like this. And so that's how you get shit done in life. You just do it yourself. At number 16 is another movie that I got to see at South by Southwest, and it's a Netflix movie as well. It's called Hitman, directed by Richard Linklater, who is one of my very favorite directors working. It was also co-written by him and Glenn Powell, who stars in the movie. This is a movie based on a true story. There was an article written in 2001 about a man named Gary Johnson, and the writer of the article was Skip Hollandsworth, who it turns out is a friend of Richard Linklater's. So he wrote about this guy who used to pose as a hitman to rope in members of society who would like to see people not around anymore because he was actually working for law enforcement. And that's the story of this movie, Hitman. But I think the unique thing about it is you take the charm of somebody like Glenn Powell and you turn this kind of silly crime thriller story into a rom-com, which is what they've done. And I think people who don't like this movie, because it was not well received. In the theater, I saw it with 1,700 people. Everybody was having a blast. There was so much laughter. The energy was palpable in that room. And then when it dropped on Netflix, the internet was ablaze with people like, turd, dud, mid. I didn't even finish it. Worst movie I've ever seen, which is dramatic. And that really shocked me. And maybe it's because we saw it in a theater. There was always an energy to film festivals where people kind of like movies a little bit more than they would have otherwise. Maybe it's that. I don't know. Maybe these people, for whatever wild reason, aren't fans of the Richard Linklater aesthetic. But I disagree. I think maybe they just don't know that it's a rom-com and they're not in the right mode going into this movie. I'm not sure. That sounds condescending, but I really am truly confused, in particular with this one, because I think Hitman is fantastic. At 15 is a movie that I saw all the way back at Sundance, Thelma. And this is an action comedy, but starring a 93-year-old woman. This is starring June Squibb. It's directed by Josh Margolin. It also has Fred Heschinger, who's in another movie on my top 20 best movies of the year list. And we'll talk about that here shortly. But Thelma was just delightful from beginning to end. It's the story of this elderly woman. It's kind of similar to the plot of The Beekeeper. She gets scammed, except she doesn't need to call the beekeeper. She doesn't need any help from him. She's going to handle shit herself. But it's shot like this Michael Bay movie at times, but it's just her going down the stairs, because that's harrowing for a 93-year-old woman. There's a car chase with those little scooters at one part, but it's also really endearing. I cried at certain parts. I think this is just a fantastically unique movie. It is such a Sundance movie, but I hope more and more people discover it because it really is something super special. At number 14, and the movie that I watched most recently is Nickel Boys. It's getting a wide release in January. It's been in limited release for a couple of weeks. So if you're in New York or LA, you probably have seen it. But if not, you just got to wait a little bit longer. This is based on a novel by Colson Whitehead of the same name. People are calling it the Great American Novel. And I think that the filmmaker, if you watch the movie, obviously took a lot of liberties with the adaptation. The unique thing about Nickel Boys, more than the score or the performances or even the story itself, is the cinematography. The camera is the main character. It's in this 4:3 aspect ratio, and it's doing something really unique that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. So this is definitely not going to be for everybody, but I think if you sit with it and think about why they shot it this way, why it is the way it is, you'll really get into it. It's really quite profound. It's shot in POV. It switches between the two main characters, Elwood and Turner. And so it's literally from the character's POV. that can be disconcerting at first, but just sit with it. Go with the flow. Even though it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, it might be hard to go with that flow. The movie's pretty brutal at times, but it doesn't actually show much of the violence. It's about these two boys at a reform school in Florida, and you can imagine how they were treated. I think you'll be thinking about it for a while, even though it might be uncomfortable at first. And your brain might tell you, I don't like this because of the whole POV thing, but I think it's fantastic. It was such an interesting idea, executed really well. At 13, possibly the most underrated movie of the year. I did talk about it on that list. You can check out that video later. Just finish this one first, dude. Don't be rude. It's The Order, and it stars Jude Law and Journey Smollett and Nicholas Hoult, who was in, again, 3 fantastic movies within like a 60-day period here at the end of last year. This movie is about a veteran FBI agent who shows up in a small town to investigate a slew of robberies and accidentally, well, he did it on purpose, but unbeknownst to him, is uncovering a domestic terrorism plot. There's a whole bunch of white supremacists, and they're up to no good, as they typically are. And I think the interesting thing about this movie is the effort it takes to show how normal these domestic terrorists are in their town or in everyday life. It shows how insidious these ideologies can be and pervasive. But it wraps all of that up in like a new Hollywood style action movie, cops and robbers movie, the kind of movie that you would see Steve McQueen star in back in the day. And I think that is the way to do it. It kind of incepts the idea. Nobody's watching it. Nobody's talking about it. And it's really sad. The score is incredible. The cinematography is incredible. Jude Law is Jude Lawing all over the place. I highly recommend it. Strange Darling is my number 12. It's a horror movie. It's a thriller movie. You guys can argue about that amongst yourself in the comments. I actually saw this movie at Fantastic Fest in 2023. JT Molnar is the director and writer, and he's awesome. I got to shake his hand afterward and talk to him because one of his friends is the one that told me to watch the movie. He was super cool. He seemed super cool. I don't know. The director of photography is Giovanni Ribisi, which I think is really interesting. It's his first outing doing that. It was shot on 70mm film, which you've seen the movie, you know, because at the beginning it says shot on 70mm film. They were really proud of that. Or was it 35mm? It doesn't matter. It was shot on film. They're really proud of it. People made fun of it because it had that title card at the beginning. I understand it can be a little hokey, but it's so rare that I get why they were proud of it. It's more expensive to shoot on film. It's more difficult. And especially for an indie film, that was an aesthetic choice that they really believed in. And I think it paid off. The movie is gorgeous. It stars Kyle Gallner and Willa Fitzgerald. And it's a cat and mouse thriller that I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about. I will say that the marketing for the film, if you watch the trailer, doesn't reveal what it actually is. And that's a really fun thing to experience while watching the movie. I think a lot of people get annoyed. They might say that the movie uses, kind of hokey, new filmmaker, film school techniques, but I think that's a really cynical way to look at this movie. This is a tight, creative, indie thriller. It does everything that you're looking for in that respect. It's very similar to something that Tarantino might do, which for good or ill is totally my jam. I had a blast with this movie back in 2023, and I'm glad everybody really seems to be loving it for the most part now that they're watching it. And I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. At 11 is Twilight of the Warriors Walled In, yet another movie that I've talked about recently as being underrated. This is my first Soi Chen movie, and his aesthetic is incredible. I'll be watching his entire filmography soon. Once again, to remind everybody, this movie is about the Kowloon walled city, which was destroyed in Hong Kong in the 90s, but at the time was this vertically built ramshackle structure that housed almost 40,000 people within just like 6 acres. So there was tons of people in there packed in. And the interesting thing is that there were really no police, no laws of any kind. So it was chaos in there. So what results in this movie is a part gang movie, part prison movie almost, but also it's part kung fu movie. It's very fantastical and surreal at times. It's really amazing. I promise you, you have seen nothing like it and nobody's watching it. Absolutely check out Twilight of the Warriors Walled In. At number 10 is a horror movie called Exhuma. It's a Korean film. I think it went straight to streaming. I'm pretty sure I saw it on Shudder. And fair warning, almost nobody has loved this movie as much as I do. Nobody digs it as much as I do. There's a folk horror aspect to it, so a fantastical element to it. It really kind of cooks and changes what it is about halfway through the movie. It's got some incredible sequences, really cool cinematography. The aesthetic of it is what I keep thinking of. The markings on the faces. I don't know much about the culture So I don't know how much of this is folk horror and how much is just completely made up, but they have to dig up some bodies, hence Exhuma, and release family curses. That's the idea. If you've seen something like The Wailing and really enjoyed it, I think you'll love this movie. But I like this movie more than The Wailing, which is probably a hot take. But if you're into that kind of shit, you're going to love this movie. It's kind of slept on as well, which is pretty typical of this list. But I loved it. Number 9 is Kneecap. I missed this on the festival run. I did catch it in theaters, and it was one of the biggest surprises of the year. I got a text from a buddy that was like, dude, Kneecap might be my favorite movie of the year. And I was like, fucking Kneecap? For real? So I ran to the theater. I drove. That was a lie. I didn't even run like up the steps. I almost certainly took the escalator, but I walked up it. I didn't like wait for it to carry me up. I think that that's kind of rude and lazy. Anyway, Kneecap is about a real Irish rap group named Kneecap, and their music is great. Anybody who likes this movie ends up putting them on Spotify on repeat for weeks and weeks after. It's really interesting. But they rap in the OG Irish language. You know, we've only gotten a few movies in cinema history that utilize this language. I think only 11,000 people even speak it. So that's really interesting. And it becomes a raunchy comedy that feels straight out of the 90s, like an early Guy Ritchie film. And then suddenly it's this profound exploration of the results of colonization and standing up for what's right and your heritage. And that came out of nowhere. I was really shocked by that. I think it's a fantastic movie. It's right on Netflix, at least in the US. So absolutely check it out. It's an easy, breezy, hilarious watch. And the messaging is not too weighty or anything. It just kind of sneaks up. It's really deftly done. I think you'll be surprised how much you love it. At number 8 is Ghostlight. I'm not going to talk too long about this movie because, again, I did talk about it a lot recently. I just really love this movie. I saw it at South by Southwest. I was a mess. No movie has made me cry as much as this one did this year. And its themes are very similar to that of Sing Sing. And most people like Sing Sing more. For me, Ghostlight worked better, but they're both about processing emotions, processing grief through the power of art, but specifically theater. A man who has recently experienced tragedy finds himself at a local community theater group. He's never acted a day in his life. He's never even thought about doing something like this. And he's able to process his complicated emotions by trying to put on this play with a bunch of weird strangers from his small town. This is a real family. They're all an actual family. So non-traditional actors that are in this film. Everybody who's watched this movie that I know of has been really affected by it. Not a lot of people have seen it, but everybody who does, it's like, hell yeah, Ghostlight. I get those comments a lot every time I bring it up. So I think you'll like it. At number 7 is Love Lies Bleeding, another movie that I saw at Sundance way back last January and haven't stopped thinking about it since. Now, if you know me, if you've been following me for a number of years on Instagram or TikTok, or know me personally, that's more rare, but you might, then you know that the likelihood of a Kristen Stewart movie being on my top 10 or top 20 of the year is extremely high, and this is no different. But I really believe in this one. It's directed by Rose Glass, and you might have seen her first feature film, Saint Maud, which is vastly different from this movie. And that's one thing that I respect, is the different aesthetic. This is a really grungy, grindhouse throwback, kind of an homage to like a pulpy 80s thriller, which is why it's set in the 80s in America. And Rose Glass isn't American, which is interesting because she handles that so well. Kristen Stewart is amazing. It's also got Dave Franco and Ed Harris giving bonkers performances. But Katie O'Brien is the standout star. And I'm so grateful to this movie for putting Katie O'Brien on my radar. She was also in Twisters last year, which another movie that I loved. It just didn't quite make this list. And I'm looking forward to watching more of what she does very, very soon. She's also apparently an incredible person, which is always good news. I love this movie. It's definitely not for everybody. It's sexy, but in like a gross way. It's violent, also in a gross way. The thing that always turns people off is there is a surreal element toward this movie that kind of grows and grows and grows. My interpretation is that it's not actually happening. It's just in their head. So that's going to make or break you. Let me know what you think of Love Lies Bleeding. I think it's streaming on Max and has been for quite some time. I've seen it twice. Big, big fan. My number 6 is Nosferatu, the newest Robert Eggers film that everybody's talking about. I did a full review on this channel a couple of weeks ago. You can check that out if you're interested. This is either your jam or it's not. I'm a gothic guy. Not in real life, like I don't color my fingernails with Sharpie anymore, but I love the aesthetic. I love Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. I love Crimson Peak or all the Guillermo del Toro stuff. If you love those movies, I think Nosferatu is made for you. But I think this was a wonderful homage to the 1922 classic film and a good tea for everybody else who's been craving it. Kicking off the top 5 is George Miller's Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. And that's the little subtitle there, tacked on by the studio in an attempt to get people to go see it. And it didn't work. This movie didn't do well. $60 million domestically, I think, which is weird because Mad Max Fury Road did pretty well and has since become a legendary action movie. I think people appreciate Mad Max Fury Road more than they ever have. They just weren't interested in this prequel for whatever reason. And I think they missed out. This is phenomenal, gorgeous, beautiful action cinema. And I think the coolest thing about the entire Mad Max saga is that all of these movies are vastly different. If you ever watched the original Mad Max and then Road Warrior and then Beyond the Thunderdome and then Fury Road, they're all vastly different in tonality and aesthetic. And I think that that's really interesting and should be applauded that that's his approach. So Furiosa does take some getting used to if you're expecting Fury Road, but once you lock in, Anya Taylor-Joy is doing incredible things as always. This is Chris Hemsworth's best performance ever. Probably. He's a wonderful villain, which you would know if you've seen Bad Times at the El Royale, which I highly recommend. But I loved Furiosa. I can't wait to watch it again and again. My number 4 is a movie that I cannot stop talking about. It's a French-Canadian film called Red Rooms. I don't know if it's the most surprising or this affected me the most. I think this is the most important movie of the year. It's a movie that I think has the most to say about our society, and it's not good. It stuck with me for days and days. It depressed the shit out of me. I was disgusted. I was upset. And you're like, well, I don't want to watch that movie. That's fair. But I do think that it's important, and I think that you should. In our habitually online society, our obsession with true crime, that's what this movie's about. But it doesn't just take a shot at the people who are obsessed with true crime. It takes a shot at all of society for forging those people. You know what I mean? It doesn't let the judges off the hook. It doesn't let the lawyers off the hook. It doesn't let the police off the hook. It doesn't let the people who are obsessed with news. It doesn't let the news anchors off the hook, the media channels themselves. It's a really deep exploration of this disease that's happening in our culture and what that does to people and what it allows to happen. And I think that's fascinating and important. It doesn't actually show any gore of any kind. It's not a violent movie, but it is profoundly disturbing. And that's all through the power of the filmmaking itself. The cinematography is gorgeous. There's a needle drop in this movie. And I was watching it with my Dolby Atmos headphones at the time that shook me to my core. Didn't expect it. You'll know it when you hear it. Definitely seek out Red Rooms. It was almost my number 1 of the year. Any of these top 4 films could have been number 1. And I could have honestly said that, but I just put it at 4. My number 3 is the movie you were probably waiting for. At least you figured it was coming. It's Dune Part 2. This was my favorite theatrical experience of the year, in a year filled with phenomenal theatrical experiences. I can still remember sitting in that IMAX chair, watching those characters ascend. And you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the movie. And my soul, I don't know why I got Italian there, my soul, ascended from my body as well. It was a spiritual experience, and everybody in that room was feeling it like, this is fucking cinema. This is a movie. And I love when you have that communal experience. I'm not a big Dune fan. Typically, I've never read Frank Herbert's books. I've tried, which is almost worse. I didn't watch the David Lynch version. And so I'm really new to all this. And still it did that to me. Just a fantastic movie. I've watched it, I think 4 times, but I saw it 3 times in theaters. And it did that to me every time. This movie works. Denis Villeneuve, hats off to you. I'm clapping, I'm applauding. I know that you're not going to get the Oscar for Best Score, but hopefully you get some other nominations. And if nothing else, everybody knows that this movie rocks for the most part. I love it so much. If it's your number 1, I totally understand that. But my number 2 is Luca Guadagnino's Challengers. And I feel kind of cool, kind of hip, because I'm an early adopter of this movie. I got to see it about 2 months early. I don't even remember. And I rated it 5 stars on Letterboxd. And all of my friends were like, oh, for real? And I was like a little nervous about that, but I was like, I'm going to stick to my guns. Yeah, fuck yeah, all 5 stars. Most people really love this movie, so I felt, a little validated. It's like, no big deal. But this movie is one of the sexiest of the year, and there's no actual sex. It's all in vibes. It's all in the music. The Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor score is phenomenal. It's not for everybody, but it is for me. The cinematography is incredible. It's not a movie about tennis. It's a very sex positive, fun, almost thriller. And it's all vibes. And I was vibing with it. But at number 1, my favorite movie of 2024, I think, is Anora, another movie that I saw at Fantastic Fest this year at 2024. And I'm a big fan of Sean Baker's work. I love The Florida Project. Most people do. I just really like what Sean Baker does. Even if it doesn't always work for me, I respect it. His tendency to use non-actors to get a sense of verite, a sense of realism. And I think Anora is his best work. That's just my opinion. I think the year belongs to Mikey Madison. What she does is so powerful, so vulnerable, and put herself all the way out there with this project. And it's a sprawling, Uncut Gems-esque mashup with Pretty Woman. A lot of people make that comparison, but it wasn't on my mind at all while I was watching it. I was in a theater with some really good friends of mine. We were all having the time of our lives, laughing our asses off until that last 10 minutes, which is a devastating blow that comes out of nowhere. And I think it works well for the themes. Its critique on capitalism and how we're all incapable, for the most part, of rising above our station, no matter what we do, because the game is rigged. And you just feel that at the core of your being towards the end of this movie, her despair and her unlikely relation to this other character who is her oppressor in one sense, but also just another side of the same coin in the same class as her. And she hates that she relates to that character in that way. I think it's a devastating blow. And I just felt it. I think it's an important movie, a movie of our times. And the fact that she's a sex worker, which is typical for Sean Baker, is really kind of irrelevant to what it's trying to say in general. Though I understand that it's sensitive for a man to be telling that story. I understand and relate to all the criticisms, but it just affected me so profoundly. And I was so in awe of what Mikey Madison was doing and some of the other relatively unknown actors were doing. I think it's an important movie, and I think it deserves to be one of the most applauded of the year. I think it's the movie of the moment kind of thing, and I think that that's cool. What Neon's doing as a distributor is also worth applauding, even though they're just a company. I think it's really cool that they've won the Palme d'Or, I think 5 years in a row, or at least bought the movie that won the Palme d'Or 5 years in a row. Just really good at scouting and picking good flicks that are important and doing different things. So Anora is it for me. It's on a lot of top best of lists, but I do understand, again, all the criticisms. It's just what I had to be honest to put at the tippy top of the mountain. So there's my top 20 of the year. Again, I still got to watch Seed of the Sacred Fig. I still got to watch The Brutalist and Exhibiting Forgiveness and Luca Guadagnino's Queer, all which have the opportunity to be in my top 20 as well. But it's January 5th or so. You just got to call it at some point. You know what I mean? I hope you found some movies that you haven't seen yet that you're really interested in seeing, or got a different perspective on some of the ones you already have seen. Let me know in the comments what your favorite movies of the year are. Please take a second to like and subscribe. Really trying to make this channel work. I'm going to be publishing 3 videos a week at least, probably Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can also check me out with my much better co-hosts on the Streaming Things podcast. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I've got a newsletter on Substack at kitlaser.com. I've got a Letterboxd. I'm all over the place. I get around when it comes to movies and TV shows. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. It means the world to me. Bye-bye.